Hello Internet, welcome back to yet another translation of one of my German videos. As always, I'll try to make this one shorter than the original, because German has words such as Kraftfahrzeughaftpflichtversicherung and English has words such as car insurance. I recently discovered that people seem to be interested in that expensive arcade machine I bought. I now have more subscribers than videos, which is amazing to me. Because not all of you can be my mom using multiple accounts. Awesome! So I guess I should keep talking about how emulation works on that machine. As always, I'm slightly drunk to help me with my English. My gaming career started with a Nintendo Entertainment System when I was 10 years old. And in the last 3 decades there have always been times when Nintendo was my main provider of the drug I so desperately need to face this meaningless existence. That is why I'm gonna talk about classic Nintendo systems today. I picked 3 regular consoles and 3 handhelds from the dawn of gaming. As I did in my video about MAME, I will show you how many games are available for each system, and I will show you some examples so you can judge for yourself how well the emulation works. If there are problems, I will tell you about them. And since I don't want this video to be 2 hours long, there will only be one hidden treasure recommendation for each system this time around. I want to remind you once again that I haven't changed any of the settings on my arcade machine, so what you see here is what you get out of the box. But at the end of the video I'll talk about the options a PC idiot like me found to get rid of some of the problems. Wow, this was a long introduction. I'll immediately start with the first system, and of course it is the NES. I'll start by showing you how many ROMs are pre-installed. This will run at high speed, but if you pause the video at the right time, you should be able to check if your favorites are included. Let's go! ROM number 200 is Donkey Kong Jr. I know this game, but I have never played it enough to become any good. At first sight it seems to be a little easier than the original Donkey Kong. I couldn't find any flaws when it came to graphics, sound or gameplay. As expected, NES runs perfectly on this machine. And as for this one, I have to say that it turned out to be a lot more fun than I expected when I started playing. Alright, let's see another 200 games. At number 400 we find The Lone Ranger. This one is quite obviously the granddaddy of Red Dead Redemption. I was very surprised by this one. It was extremely complex for olden times, and I was shocked that I had never heard of it before. In my opinion, it deserves to be named among the best NES games ever. A short internet research helped me to understand the mystery of this hidden gem. Apparently it came out at a time when the franchise was basically just a distant memory of old people who did not play video games. Too bad. I'm actually really happy to have stumbled upon this one by accident. Games like these are exactly why I bought my arcade machine. If you want to sell this one, let me know in the comments. Oh, and this is actually the last time that I will tell you that NES games run perfectly on my arcade machine. Let's hope that game number 600 will be another pleasant surprise. The Simpsons: Bart vs. the World is a game I've often heard about, but this was actually the first time I ever played it. It got boring rather quickly. It's pretty mediocre jump and run action with some easy puzzles thrown in. Instead of talking about it longer than necessary, I'll just show you the rest of the NES games on the hard drive. And the final count is 790. That is how many NES ROMs are included on my unit from Tiny Arcade Machines. That should basically cover all of the games that were released in the US and Europe. A lot more titles were released for the Japanese Famicom, but I'm actually glad that they weren't included here, because it would have been a lot of work to look through all of them to find out which ones are playable without knowing any Japanese. The last game in the alphabet is Zombie Nation, and I couldn't have asked for a better bookend to this section. Is it art? Is it a drug-fueled nightmare? Did a programmer lose his mind and just keep going? I don't know. All I can say is that this is one of the craziest games I have ever played. You control a severed head and you have to shoot everything on screen. Desperate little people keep attacking you to keep their buildings from being demolished. Even though the color palette is a little bland, the graphics are amazing for its time. I guess the music is also good, but I can't really tell because of all the explosions. Before we jump to the next system, I'll show you one hidden gem for the NES. And it is The Legend of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. It probably sounds a little weird to call an entry of one of the most beloved video game franchises ever a hidden gem, but I think it is fitting in this special case. Every other Zelda game ever released, let's pretend the Philips CDI never existed, is celebrated as a masterpiece today. The only exception is The Adventure of Link. It was criticized when it was first released, and it received even more hate in the years that followed. I never understood why. I actually played this before I got my hands on the first Zelda, and it will always remain among my greatest gaming memories. Before Zelda 2 I had never seen a game that was so complex and had such a refined gameplay. I guess people don't like it because it dared to be different. I can find nothing wrong with that, and I enjoy playing it to this day. By the way, the save system that was battery powered on the original cartridge works flawlessly on the emulator. This isn't only true for the NES, but for all systems I'm showing you today. The next system is a lot more obscure, so this shouldn't take very long. It's the Japanese Famicom Disk System. Here we don't get to see any game previews, even though I think it is the same emulator that was used for the NES. Very mysterious. There are only 125 games, and the very last one is called Zelda no Densetsu: The Hyrule Fantasy. Sadly, I can't show you any gameplay at this point, because I finally encountered some problems. A lot of the games for this old add-on came on two-sided floppy disks that needed to be turned over in order to load all of the stored information. I tried every button combination but was unable to figure out how to load side B. That doesn't mean that the emulator isn't capable of doing it. It simply can't be done without attaching a mouse and keyboard to the machine. But more on that later. Right now I can only show you Donkey Kong on the Famicom Disk System, which apparently fit on one side of the disc. It looks exactly like regular NES Donkey Kong. Maybe it has the extra level from the arcade. I wouldn't know because I suck too much at this game to find out. We have arrived in the 16-bit era, and there we find the legendary SNES, or the SNES as weird people like to call it. I'll push the fast forward button now. Number 200 is Fighter's History, one of the many Street Fighter II clones of the time. I've played a lot of games which were obviously based on the classic fighting game, but this might just be the most blatant rip-off ever. All the characters, the movesets and the graphics have been stolen from the original and very little effort was made to cover it up. This reminds me of something.
I think I love you.
Oh. Thank you.
I love you, Penny.
Thank you.
Scary, isn't it? It's pretty much the same feeling you get when playing Fighter's History. Everything feels familiar but wrong. I just don't know why this cartridge was ever released. People who played Street Fighter won't find anything new. Let's hope that game number 400 is a little better. Here we go again. Great! It actually is better, because it is NBA Jam, a true classic. There is still similar sports games coming out today. In my opinion, old school NBA Jam beats its modern counterparts easily, because it is not infested with stupid microtransactions like the current NBA Playgrounds 2. It is still a lot of fun to play a game of basketball where the physics of the real world don't really matter. In NBA Jam, everybody flies 3 times higher than Jordan in his prime, which makes this one of the most fun multiplayer experiences on the SNES. Let's crank up the speed once again. Super Batter Up is the next game I'll take a closer look at. Sadly, I can't really say much about it. I always thought that baseball was a very interesting sport, but made a terrible basis for a video game. During my long gaming career, I only enjoyed baseball when it was presented as a simplified minigame in franchises such as Wii Sports or Super Monkey Ball. Super Batter Up is boring in comparison. Well, I guess I should use the time to talk about the quality of the emulation then. As you might have guessed by now, SNES ROMs also run perfectly. And if you noticed any glitches like sprites disappearing for a second, it is not due to bad software but to inexperience with the weird capture hardware I used to record this. And now we know. My tiny arcade machine Extreme 114N1 Plus, wow, quite a name, came with 788 SNES ROMs. Alphabetically speaking, the very last game is Zoop. I had never played this one before, but it turns out to be a rather entertaining puzzle game. At its core, it is a crossbreed of Bust-A-Move and Zuma, but sadly the graphics are so bland that your eyes will get bored very quickly. I'd rather play one of the many alternatives if I have the choice. It is finally time for my hidden gem recommendation, and it is Ultima 6: The False Prophet. I get super nostalgic when I play this, just as I do with many other games that sleep on the hard drive of this machine. I still remember when I was in the 6th grade and the only person I knew who owned a PC with a VGA graphics card was the father of a friend. After long negotiations, we finally convinced him to let us into his office on a Sunday to play Ultima 6. We stayed in there for 12 hours straight and finally experienced our favorite game with enough colors to actually see what was happening.
When it's time for action, this man turns to his new RCA Victor color console. Color so real, you'll think you are there.
Unhand her! For color so real, you'll think you're there.
Younger people than me might have a hard time liking The False Prophet. It is a very old Western RPG by now, and it is much slower than modern RPG fans are used to. Everything is extremely complicated, and if you are playing with a controller instead of a mouse, it gets even worse. Managing your inventory, fighting monsters, and even looting a room takes forever. I don't care about any of that, because when I was a kid, I was so fascinated by the epic story of the Ultima series that I can still deal with all of the problems today. Those were all of the regular Nintendo consoles I wanted to talk about today. Incredible, this video is already 18 minutes long. Let's not waste any more time. Here are the first 200 games for the original Game Boy, Nintendo's legendary grey handheld that changed portable gaming forever. Number 200 is called High Stakes. It is a gambling sim, which usually means it is quite boring. But whoever made this did their best to make it more interesting than the average game of its kind. There is actually a story where you have to fight the mafia by bankrupting them by being a better gambler. Through a lot of missions you advance to the toughest mobsters in town. It is even possible to cheat if you are willing to spend the money to do that. All of this doesn't mean that High Stakes is an amazing game, but it is far more interesting than most of the other titles about gambling, which take themselves seriously. As you might have guessed, classic Game Boy emulation works perfectly, and that is also true for Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance, which are coming up shortly. The only exception would be weird cartridges like WarioWare Twisted, which had a built-in motion sensor. But then again, I never really picked up the arcade machine and shook it. Maybe next time. Anyways, here are the next 200 games for the Nintendo Classic Handheld. I don't really think that Riddick Bowe boxing for the Game Boy can be quite as exciting as the real heavyweight bouts of the former champ in the 90s.
Oh, and another one goes low, and he's disqualified. Gallotta is disqualified, and Bowe, flat on his back, has won the fight. Andrew Gallotta is disqualified. Now there's a brawl going on in the ring. Somebody's trying to attack Gallotta.
When a handheld has only 2 buttons, I don't really expect a realistic representation of the sport of boxing. But this one is even worse than it should be. While the graphics might be just okay and the gameplay is on the edge of alright, the sound is so terrible that I didn't want to keep playing after 1 minute. This sounds like Pong, not like boxing. The end is nigh. I counted 565 ROMs for the classic Game Boy. Honestly, I expected more, but since once again no Japanese exclusives were considered, the library is a little smaller than expected. And the last game is Zoop. Wait a second, wasn't this the last game for the SNES? I meant, and the last game is Zool. This turns out to be a fun little platformer. You have to guide a small ninja through various quite different levels. This plays a little like ancient Mario Brothers, but with ninja weapons. The music tried to give me seizures, but I powered through. By the way, before you make fun of my gaming skills, please remember that I recorded all of this while blindfolded. Bird Box challenge forever!
Come on, kid! Come on, kid! Oh, kid, let's go!
And my hidden treasure for the Game Boy is Pocket Bomberman. I probably played more Bomberman games than you and everybody you know combined. But after discovering Saturn Bomberman, I decided that there was no point in playing any more of them. You should check out my review. No, wait. You should learn German and then check out my review. Pocket Bomberman is an oddity that has a different gameplay from most of the other entries in the franchise. And that is what makes it worth playing even today. This one combines jump and run elements with the classic Bomberman formula, and that makes it feel familiar but fresh at the same time. If you have beaten everything the main mode has to offer, you can face the incredibly difficult jump game, where the famous master of explosions can't stop hopping around. It's hard, it's fun. I bought this cartridge 20 years ago. After the Game Boy came the Game Boy Color. Let's check out the first 200 games for this technological marvel from the year 1998. I played the ancient track and field a lot in my childhood, but international track and field for the GBC was totally new to me. I didn't spend a lot of time with it, but my first half hour with this game was great. It is your goal to push a new and upcoming athlete to a world-class level. This time it isn't only speed and skill that are required, you also need a good strategy. Just like the amazing Mario Tennis and Mario Golf on the Game Boy Color, this title has been infused with some RPG elements. This decision gives it a lot more longevity than a regular sports simulation. I'm definitely going back to this one, and I'll try to beat it. While recording the gameplay for this video, I noticed how cool it is to play some of the old classics on a big screen that is backlit. If you are into emulation, you already knew this, but for someone like me, who never really looked into that stuff, it was a true revelation. Less talky, more looky at games. I was surprised to find out just how many Game Boy Color games there are. For me, this was always a weird mid-step between two far more successful handhelds. Oh well, I guess I was wrong. Number 400 is Roswell Conspiracies, Aliens, Myths and Legends. Once again, I can't really say much about it because I was too stupid to understand what to do and got hopelessly lost in the very first level. I only know that it looks quite ambitious, and apparently you have to unmask all kinds of monsters with a scanner and then make them dead with a gun. Looks good, that's all I know. Here is my Game Boy Color hidden gem, and this one is very special to me. Warlocked was never released here in Germany, but I had to import it the second after finishing reading an article about it. I always loved real-time strategy titles such as Warcraft 2 or Command & Conquer. That's why I needed this cartridge. Warlocked is actually a full RTS with 2 campaigns and a lot of features. In the year 2000 it was a miracle that something like this was available for a handheld, and I still love playing it today. Maybe I should buy another arcade machine so I can check if the emulator supports the link cable mode. I just noticed that I'm making another endless video. I don't really want to beat the Lord of the Rings movies when it comes to runtime, and there are a lot of Game Boy Advance games, so I decided to only stop the countdown every 400 titles from now on. Freakstyle isn't quite as freaky as the name suggests. It's a rather simple racer with an isometric perspective. The gameplay reminds me of classics like Micro Machines, and sadly I have the problem that my brain reacts with confusion to games like this. This should be easy, but I just keep choosing the wrong direction in every curve. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I fell down the stairs as a kid. People without similar handicaps might enjoy Freakstyle a lot more. There are quite a few challenges, the graphics are okay, and even though they sound a bit flat, it is cool to hear digitized songs with vocals on a GBA game. Sadly, the trick system is a little superficial, so the game loses its steam rather quickly. I'll restart the countdown. Game 800 in the massive GBA library is R-Type 3. Since I guess that most people are familiar with this series, I'll make it quick. It's a shoot 'em up. The graphics are great. The sound is just alright. It is a lot slower than more modern games. There are a lot of weapons. It's fun. And that was all I had to say about that. Let's finish this. It's a good thing I changed the pacing of this. Otherwise I would have had to talk about That's So Raven too. Guess we all got lucky here. $1,129 games is the total for the GBA, and I already created a nice spreadsheet to organize the free time of the next 3 generations of the Afro-Toad clan. By the year 2075 my offspring should have beaten all of those games. Zoo, with 3 O's, is a colorful puzzler with a typical happy soundtrack. It reminds me a little of the Bejeweled games, and as many of the games of this category, Zoo is quite addictive. It is finally time for the very last hidden gem. On the GBA I really enjoyed Rescue Heroes. The graphics are quite stunning, but even with less impressive visuals, this would have been a very interesting game. It's basically a run and gun title for pacifists, because all you really shoot is fire. The hero has to fight his way through various stages, and he can use a couple of tools in order to save citizens and animals in peril. Only after every living thing has been rescued, the firefighter himself can leave a level. The short helicopter minigames are a little inconsequential, but they still work as a nice distraction between the main courses. The low difficulty can be criticized. But I'm allowed to like a game for kids, aren't I? Yes, I am. I'm done with the games, but I told you I have something more to say at the end of this. Yeah, we're almost done. Of course you want to be able to save any game at every time today, and I'm happy to report that you can totally do that on every single emulator I've shown you today. Sadly, it is sometimes a little more complicated as I initially thought. There are many button combinations through which the many different keys on a keyboard can be simulated. It's too bad that the instructions that came with my machine don't really help you to figure out what is what. That's why keyboard and mouse are never far from my arcade machine. Through trial and error I figured out that I can easily open the menu of the NES emulator from within the Hyperspin front end. After that I could easily create multiple save games. On the SNES I managed to load saves with button combinations, but creating the saves remained a mystery. After closing Hyperspin, I was able to look up that Shift plus one of the F keys on the keyboard creates save games. When nothing else works, Hyperspin should be closed completely. Whenever you run an emulator straight from Windows, everything is much easier and you can open all of the menus easily. So you can not only save, but also mess with different options. By changing some stuff around, I could already fix some of the problems I mentioned in earlier videos. And of course I was able to load Side B on the Famicom Disk System. It's just too bad that any changes don't seem to affect Hyperspin at all. That front end has multiple software assistants to configure everything. Those looked very complicated and scary to me, so I didn't dare mess around with any of them yet. After praising them more than once in my videos, I finally have to criticize the manufacturers of these machines a bit. If they would have spent just 2 more hours on software configuration, a lot of problems could have been completely avoided. And that's all, folks. Thanks for sticking with it to the end. That ancient Nintendo systems worked perfectly probably wasn't a big surprise for you, but for me it made sense to combine them into this one video. I was quite satisfied with the available ROMs, although it would have been cool if homebrews and some ROM hacks would have been included. But oh well. By the way, this time I actually put some effort into this, so it would be cool of you to leave a like or send me some cookies. I need a break now. See you and have fun gaming.